London, 1851. Miss Beatrice Ravenswood stood at the edge of Lady Hartington's ballroom, a porcelain figurine among the swirling dancers. At 26, she had perfected the art of polite refusal. No fewer than 12 gentlemen had approached her this season alone, each departing with the same courteous dismissal that had become her signature. Another rejection, Beatrice, her cousin Louisa whispered, appearing at her elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. Poor Mr. Fennington looked positively crushed. Then Mr. Fennington should develop a sturdier constitution, Beatrice replied, accepting the glass. Men are so terribly fragile when denied something they believe should be theirs by right. You cannot refuse them all forever, Louisa chided. Even your substantial inheritance won't protect you from spinsterhood. I would rather be a wealthy spinster than a miserable wife, Beatrice said, her smile never wavering as she surveyed the room. I've seen what happens when women surrender their independence. I shan't make the same mistake. Beatrice had learned early that a woman's heart was a liability. Her own mother had died of it, not literally from heart failure but from the slow, excruciating dissolution that came from loving a man who squandered her dowry, her dignity, and eventually, her will to live. George Ravenswood had been charming, handsome, and utterly destructive. After his gambling debts claimed their family home, he had disappeared into the night, leaving his wife to waste away from grief and his daughter to rebuild from nothing. Through shrewd investments and an unexpected inheritance from a maternal great-aunt, Beatrice had secured her fortune and her freedom. She required nothing more from life than her comfortable townhouse, her small circle of trusted friends, and the certainty that no man would ever control her destiny. There's a commotion at the entrance, Louisa said, standing on tiptoe. I believe, yes, it's him. The Duke of Cavendish has arrived. Beatrice raised an eyebrow. The Ice Duke himself? How unfortunate for Lady Hartington. He's said to freeze the champagne with a single glance. Valentine Cavendish, the 7th Duke of Cavendish, was known throughout London for his forbidding demeanor and ruthless business acumen. Widowed after a brief marriage some 8 years prior, he rarely attended social functions, preferring to manage his vast estates and financial empire from the gloomy confines of Cavendish House. When he did appear, mothers hurriedly shepherded their daughters to safety, for the Duke's reputation was as black as his customary evening attire. They say he once ruined a man for merely questioning his honor, Louisa whispered excitedly. And that he keeps his first wife's portrait shrouded in black in the east wing of Cavendish House. Nonsense, Beatrice scoffed, though she couldn't deny a flutter of curiosity as the crowd parted before the tall figure making his way across the ballroom. People simply adore inventing Gothic tales about widowers. The Duke moved with the fluid grace of a predator, acknowledging acquaintances with the barest inclination of his head. His features were not conventionally handsome, too sharp, too severe, but there was an undeniable force to his presence that commanded attention. His dark hair was swept back from a high forehead, and his eyes, even from this distance, seemed to pierce through the frivolity around him. His looking this way, Louisa breathed, clutching Beatrice's arm. Don't be absurd, Beatrice began, but the words died on her lips as those penetrating eyes locked with hers across the ballroom. For one disconcerting moment, Beatrice felt as though the entire room had fallen away, leaving only that unwavering gaze. She lifted her chin slightly, refusing to be intimidated. The Duke's mouth curved in what might have been amusement before he turned away to greet their hostess. Did you see that? Louisa demanded. He smiled at you. That was not a smile, Beatrice corrected. That was the facial equivalent of a chess player contemplating his next move. Yet despite her dismissive words, Beatrice found herself watching the Duke as he navigated the room. Unlike most aristocrats, who cultivated an air of bored languor, Valentine Cavendish moved with purpose. His every gesture seemed deliberate, economical. There was something almost mathematical in his precision. Lady Hartington appeared at Beatrice's side, flushed with excitement. "Miss Ravenswood, I believe you've not been introduced to the Duke of Cavendish. His Grace has specifically requested the pleasure." Before Beatrice could formulate a response, the lady had taken her by the elbow and was steering her toward the forbidding figure now standing near a marble column. "Your Grace, may I present Miss Beatrice Ravenswood," Lady Hartington said, beaming as though she had accomplished a great coup. "Miss Ravenswood, His Grace the Duke of Cavendish." Up close, the Duke was even more intimidating. He stood well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders emphasized by impeccable tailoring. His eyes, she now saw, were a startling shade of grey, not the warm grey of dove feathers, but the cold, clear grey of steel. "Miss Ravenswood," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "I've heard a great deal about your selectivity." Beatrice felt heat rise to her cheeks. "I wasn't aware that my personal affairs were of interest to dukes, Your Grace." "Everything is of interest to me, Miss Ravenswood," he replied, and something in his tone made her pulse quicken. "I make it my business to understand the motivations behind people's choices." "And have you developed a theory regarding mine?" she asked, meeting his gaze directly. "Several," he admitted, "though I suspect none are entirely correct. People rarely act from simple motives." The orchestra struck up a waltz, and to Beatrice's astonishment, the Duke extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor?" She should refuse. Every instinct told her to maintain the distance that had protected her for so long. Yet something, curiosity, perhaps, or the challenge in those grey eyes, made her place her gloved hand in his. "I must warn you, Your Grace," she said as he led her onto the dance floor, "I've cultivated quite a reputation for disappointing gentlemen's expectations." "Then we are well matched," he replied, placing his hand at her waist, "as I've cultivated one for exceeding them." The music began, and Beatrice found herself swept into the waltz with unexpected grace. The Duke led with confidence, his steps perfectly timed, his grip firm but not constraining. She had danced with many men, but never one who moved with such controlled power. "You dance well for a man who reportedly avoids ballrooms," she observed. "I avoid what does not interest me," he corrected. "That does not mean I haven't mastered the necessary skills." As they turned, Beatrice became acutely aware of the stares following them. Every eye in the ballroom seemed fixed on the unlikely pair they made, the Ice Duke and the woman known for refusing every suitor. "We're causing quite a stir," she murmured. "Does that concern you?" "Not particularly. I've never governed my actions by others' opinions." "Another thing we have in common," he said, guiding her through a particularly complex turn with effortless skill. "Though I suspect our reasons differ." "And what are your reasons, Your Grace?" Beatrice asked, suddenly curious about this enigmatic man who seemed to see through the careful facade she presented to society. "Efficiency," he replied. "Public opinion is fickle and often misinformed. Making decisions based on such unstable foundations would be poor strategy. You speak as though life were a game of chess. Isn't it?" His grey eyes studied her face with unsettling intensity. Moves and countermoves, sacrifices and strategies, all with the ultimate goal of protecting what's most valuable. "And what do you protect, Duke?" For the briefest moment, something flickered behind that controlled expression, a glimpse of deeper waters beneath the frozen surface. Then it was gone, replaced by the same measured gaze. "What any man protects, Miss Ravenswood." "My legacy." As they neared the edge of the dance floor, he leaned slightly closer. His breath warmed her ear as he whispered, "You've built walls to keep men at bay, Miss Ravenswood, but I've made a career of dismantling fortifications far more formidable than yours." Before she could respond, the music ended. The Duke stepped back and bowed formally, but his eyes never left hers. "Thank you for the dance," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "I look forward to our next encounter." Then he was gone, moving through the crowd with the same purposeful stride, leaving Beatrice standing at the edge of the dance floor with her heart beating an unfamiliar rhythm and her carefully constructed world tilted on its axis. By morning, the gossip had spread throughout London. The notorious Miss Ravenswood, who had refused countless eligible bachelors, had danced with the fearsome Duke of Cavendish. The speculation was feverish, the rumors wilder with each retelling. "They're saying he intends to court you," Louisa announced, bursting into Beatrice's morning room without waiting for the butler's announcement. She tossed the society pages onto the breakfast table. "Look! The Ice Duke thaws, has the discerning Miss R. finally met her match." Beatrice glanced at the paper with a frown. Absurd. It was one dance, not a proposal. "But why you?" Louisa persisted. "He's never shown interest in any woman since his wife died. And you never dance with anyone a second time." "Perhaps we both momentarily lost our senses," Beatrice replied, though she'd been asking herself the same question through a sleepless night. Something about the Duke had penetrated her carefully constructed defenses, not his title or his fortune, which had never impressed her, but the sense that behind his cold facade lay a mind that might actually understand her own. That afternoon, a package arrived. Inside the plain wooden box, Beatrice found a chess set of exquisite craftsmanship, the pieces carved from ebony and ivory. A note accompanied it, written in a strong, slanting hand, "Miss Ravenswood. For our next encounter. I prefer to play as Black. Cavendish." 2 days later, the Duke's carriage appeared at her door. Against her better judgment, Beatrice received him in her small but elegantly appointed drawing room. "Most women would have refused my unconventional invitation," he observed, studying the chess set she had arranged by the window. "I am not most women," Beatrice replied, taking her seat at the ivory side of the board. "Though I'm curious why you assumed I play chess at all." "You manage your own investments rather than employing a man of business," he said, settling opposite her. "You've outmaneuvered at least a dozen fortune hunters. And you maintained your composure perfectly when I deliberately provoked you during our dance." His lips curved slightly. "You think strategically, Miss Ravenswood." The game that followed was the most challenging Beatrice had ever played. The Duke was a formidable opponent, his moves unpredictable yet precise. Their conversation flowed naturally between moves, touching on everything from recent parliamentary debates to the industrial innovations on display at the Great Exhibition. "You've studied economics," he noted after she made a particularly astute observation about the impact of railway expansion on regional trade. "I've studied survival," she corrected, capturing one of his knights. "When one starts with nothing, one learns quickly how fortunes are made and lost. Yet you reject marriage, the traditional means by which women secure their futures." Beatrice's fingers tightened on her queen. "I've seen what happens when a woman surrenders control of her fortune to a man who values pleasures above responsibilities." "Your father," the Duke said, not a question but a statement. Beatrice looked up sharply. "You've been investigating me." "I investigate everything that interests me," he admitted without apology. "George Ravenswood abandoned his family after gambling away his wife's dowry and most of your childhood home. He died in a debtor's prison 5 years ago. And this information makes you believe you understand me." Her voice was cool, but her hands trembled slightly as she moved her bishop. "It helps me understand why you might equate marriage with loss of control," he replied, studying the board. "But not all men are your father, Miss Ravenswood." "No. Some are much worse," she said. "They disguise their intentions beneath titles and manners, but in the end, they all want the same thing, the woman's fortune and her obedience. The Duke moved his queen with deliberate precision. "Check," he said quietly. "And you're wrong. What I want is far more complex than your fortune, considerable though it may be." "Then what do you want, Your Grace?" Beatrice asked, moving her king out of danger. Valentine Cavendish studied her face for a long moment before answering. "A partnership," he said finally. "One based on mutual respect rather than the usual matrimonial arrangement." "You speak of marriage?" she asked, startled by his directness. "Eventually," he acknowledged. "But I'm aware that your trust must be earned. I'm prepared to demonstrate my intentions through actions rather than merely words." "Checkmate," he added, moving his rook to its final position. Beatrice stared at the board in disbelief. She had been so engaged in their conversation that she'd missed his strategy entirely. "You distracted me deliberately," she accused. "I spoke honestly while playing to win," he corrected, rising from his seat. "I suggest you consider whether it's possible to do both." Before leaving, he extended an invitation to tour the new wing of the Museum of Industrial Innovation, of which he was a patron. To her own surprise, Beatrice accepted. Thus began the most unusual courtship in London. Over the following weeks, the Duke escorted Beatrice not to balls or operas, but to lectures on mechanical engineering, exhibitions of industrial design, and once, memorably, to his own factory where steam-powered looms transformed raw cotton into fabric with mechanical precision. "Most men would take a lady to admire flowers, not machinery," Beatrice observed as they walked among the thundering looms. "Most men aim to delight rather than engage," Valentine replied. "I find your mind far more interesting than your ability to appreciate conventional beauty." Yet for all their intellectual compatibility, Beatrice maintained her emotional distance. Each time the Duke came too close to the carefully guarded chambers of her heart, she retreated behind practiced defenses. "You still don't trust me," he noted one afternoon as they walked through Hyde Park, deliberately keeping a proper distance between them despite the privacy afforded by his hulking footman following several paces behind. "I don't trust any man completely," she admitted. "It's not personal, Your Grace." "After 6 weeks of what even you must admit is courtship, might you not call me Valentine?" he asked, a rare hint of frustration in his voice. "Names suggest intimacy," Beatrice said carefully. "I'm not certain that intimacy is what you want," he finished for her. "Yet you continue to accept my invitations. You engage with me more honestly than with anyone in your social circle. You've revealed aspects of your thinking you've hidden from others." He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "What are you afraid of, Beatrice?" The sound of her given name on his lips sent an unexpected shiver through her. "I'm afraid of losing myself," she admitted. "Of becoming so attached to someone that I can no longer stand alone." "Is that what you believe happened to your mother?" "That she loved too much. She gave everything, her fortune, her dignity, her very self, to a man who valued none of it," Beatrice said, the old pain rising in her throat. "In the end, she had nothing left, not even the will to live." Valentine was silent for a moment, his grey eyes thoughtful. "My father was much like yours," he said finally. "A charming libertine who saw my mother's fortune as his personal gaming purse. The difference is that she fought back. When I was 12, she took me and what remained of her separate property and established herself in a small house in Bath. She taught me that true strength isn't the ability to stand alone, but the courage to stand up for what matters, even against those who should love you most." It was the most personal revelation he had ever made to her, and Beatrice felt the impact of his trust like a physical touch. "What happened to her?" she asked softly. "She rebuilt her life. Established a small lending library. found contentment, if not the grand passion she'd once imagined. His expression softened with memory. She died knowing I would never become my father. Something shifted between them in that moment, a deepening of understanding, a glimpse of the man beneath the Duke's formidable exterior. The next day, a letter arrived from Beatrice's solicitor with alarming news. The investments that formed the foundation of her independence had suffered an unexpected reversal. A speculative railway venture that had promised substantial returns had collapsed amid allegations of fraud. Beatrice read the letter twice, her hands growing cold. Half her fortune, gone. The careful plan she had made, the security she had built brick by brick over years of caution, suddenly imperiled. Her first thought was of Valentine. Would his interest survive this dramatic reduction in her circumstances? The cynical part of her, the part shaped by her father's betrayal and years of watching fortune hunters circle her friends, expected him to withdraw his attentions now that her dowry was significantly diminished. She wrote him a brief note, cancelling their plans to attend a demonstration of the new telegraph system. Her pride could not bear to see his disappointment, or worse, his pity. 3 days passed with no word from the Duke. Beatrice told herself this confirmed her worst suspicions, his interest had been financial after all. She ignored the ache in her chest, focusing instead on practical matters. She would need to sell her townhouse, reduce her household staff, perhaps even. Her thoughts were interrupted by a commotion in the entrance hall. Before her butler could announce the visitor, Valentine Cavendish strode into her drawing room, his expression thunderous. 3 days, he said without preamble. 3 days with no word beyond a cryptic note. I had to hear from Lord Pemberton that you'd suffered financial losses. Beatrice rose from her desk, her chin lifting. I didn't realize I was obligated to report my financial affairs to you, Your Grace. You're not obligated to report anything, he replied, his voice tight with barely controlled emotion. But I thought we had progressed beyond games and masks, Beatrice. There's no game here, she said. My circumstances have changed. I assumed your interest would change accordingly. For a moment, he looked genuinely bewildered. Then understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that might have been hurt. You believed I would withdraw my suit because you lost money, he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Isn't that the natural conclusion, she challenged. What else could interest a man of your position in someone like me? Someone like you, he repeated slowly. An intelligent, principled woman who challenges every assumption I make. Who sees through pretense and demands honesty. Who has never once simpered or flattered or pretended to be less than she is. He took a step toward her, his expression fierce. Do you truly believe I've spent these weeks in your company because of your investment portfolio? I don't know what to believe, Beatrice admitted, her composure finally cracking. I've spent my entire adult life protecting myself from precisely this situation, being vulnerable, dependent. Is that what you think I want? Your dependency. Valentine closed the distance between them, stopping just short of touching her. Beatrice, I could have married any number of biddable heiresses if I wanted a decorative dependent. What I want, what I've always wanted, is a partner. Someone who sees the world clearly. Someone whose strength complements my own. Even now, she asked, searching his face for any sign of deception. Even knowing I bring much less to a marriage than before. I have more money than any man should possess, he said bluntly. What I lack is someone who cares more about the man than the title. Someone who argues with me, challenges me, makes me question my assumptions. His voice softened. Someone who sees Valentine, not just the Duke of Cavendish. He reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and took her hand in his. I don't want to own you, Beatrice. I want to build something with you. The sincerity in his eyes undid her last defenses. For 8 years, she had hidden behind walls of independence, convincing herself that she needed nothing and no one. Now, looking into Valentine's face, she recognized the truth she'd been fleeing. Real strength wasn't found in isolation but in choosing the right person to stand beside. "I'm afraid," she confessed, her voice barely a whisper. "Not of poverty or scandal, but of this, of feeling so much that I cannot bear to lose it." "I know," he said simply. "I've been afraid since the moment I saw you across Lady Hartington's ballroom. Afraid that you would refuse me as you've refused everyone else. Afraid that I would never find another woman who could see past the duke to the man beneath." His thumb brushed across her knuckles, a gesture so tender it nearly broke her heart. "But I've learned that some fears must be faced if we're to have anything worth having." Beatrice looked down at their joined hands, his large and strong, hers small but equally certain in its grip. "I cannot promise I'll transform overnight," she warned. "I've spent too long protecting myself to surrender those habits easily." "I don't want your surrender," Valentine said. "I want your alliance. Your partnership. Your trust, given freely, not because I demand it but because I've earned it." His lips curved in the genuine smile that had become increasingly common in her presence. "And I'm prepared to be very patient while earning it." Before she could respond, he released her hand and reached into his waistcoat pocket, withdrawing a small folded paper. "I took the liberty of investigating your railway investment," he said, his tone shifting to businesslike efficiency. "The company's failure was not due to market forces but deliberate fraud. The directors diverted funds to a separate enterprise while leaving shareholders with worthless paper." He handed her the document. "These are the names of 3 other investors who have agreed to join in legal action. With your permission, my solicitors will add your name to the suit." Beatrice unfolded the paper, scanning the names, all prominent investors known for their shrewdness. "You did this for me?" she asked, genuinely touched by the effort he'd made while believing she had rejected him. "I did it because it was right," he corrected. "And because I understood that your independence matters to you. I would never want you to feel that you must rely on my fortune when those who stole from you could be made to provide restitution." It was this, more than any declaration of affection, that convinced Beatrice of the depth of his regard. He had acted to restore what mattered most to her, not out of self-interest, but out of respect for her values. "Ask me again," she said softly. Valentine looked momentarily confused. "Ask you?" "What you've been circling around for weeks," Beatrice clarified, her heart pounding but her mind suddenly, perfectly clear. "Ask me properly, Valentine." Understanding dawned in his eyes. With formal gravity, he took her hand again and lowered himself to one knee. "Beatrice Ravenswood," he said, his voice steady but his eyes revealing the emotion beneath, "I have never met a woman more capable of standing on her own. I do not ask you to surrender that strength, but to join it with mine. Will you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not as the Duchess of Cavendish, but as my equal, my partner, my most trusted ally?" Beatrice looked down at this powerful man kneeling before her, not in supplication, but in acknowledgement of the equality he offered. All her life, she had equated love with loss, seeing only what her mother had sacrificed. Now she understood what her mother had never had the chance to find: love could be a foundation rather than a prison, a source of strength rather than weakness. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I will marry you, Valentine Cavendish. Not for your title or your fortune, but for the man who sees me as I truly am and values what he sees." Valentine rose to his feet, and for the first time since their courtship began, he drew her into his arms. His kiss was like the man himself, controlled yet passionate, considerate yet commanding. Beatrice felt something long frozen within her begin to thaw, a warmth spreading through her veins like spring after a long winter. When they parted, Valentine rested his forehead against hers. "I should warn you," he murmured, "that despite my reputation, I am not entirely made of ice." "Nor am I entirely made of stone," Beatrice replied with a smile. "Though I suspect society will be thoroughly scandalized to discover we're both quite human." "Let them talk," Valentine said, drawing her closer. "We have more important matters to attend to than society's opinion." In the months that followed, London buzzed with the news of the unlikely engagement. The Ice Duke and the woman who had refused every suitor were to be wed. Some whispered that it was a marriage of convenience, others that Miss Ravenswood had finally met a man whose will matched her own. A few romantic souls suggested it was a love match, though such notions were generally dismissed as fanciful. Only Beatrice and Valentine knew the full truth, that in each other, they had found not just a match, but a mirror, someone who reflected their strengths, understood their fears, and offered not subjugation or dominance, but the most radical proposition of all, a true partnership of equals. On their wedding day, as Beatrice walked toward the altar where Valentine waited, she carried no fear with her. The woman who had once defined herself by what she refused now stepped willingly into a new identity, not as a possession or an accessory, but as a duchess who had chosen her duke as deliberately as he had chosen her. And when Valentine took her hand before God and assembled witnesses, his whispered words were for her alone: "This is not surrender, but alliance. Not ending, but beginning." In that moment, Beatrice Ravenswood, soon to be Cavendish, recognized the final truth that had eluded her for so long, that the greatest act of independence was not refusing every hand offered, but choosing one worthy of her trust and offering her own in return.